Welcome to MacRack and our video series on struts and how critical they are for the overall structure of your warehouse racking system. These small cross beams that you see here throughout this initial construction phase are critical components to your overall racking system. In fact, they're one of the systems that keep your system from distorting in a single direction so that your racks will keep from collapsing. So these tiny pieces of steel are critical for your overall warehouse safety and the efficiency of running your warehouse. So let's learn about this one critical component. So these are the different strut patterns that you can have. First, a little terminology. This is what we call a frame. It's composed of two vertical columns and then the struts. Now these frames are put together with beams which would compose an entire bay of racking that goes up vertically. And we put those together to make an entire racking aisle, and then all the aisles together to make an entire racking system. So each of these frames is a critical component. And the component that we're talking about here is the strut, which is the small metal reinforcement piece that goes in these different patterns. And we'll talk about how these patterns strengthen your racking system in a bit, but just suffice to say, you probably have one of these four patterns in your warehouse racking. And it's very important to identify this pattern and make sure that it's consistently applied throughout your entire system because it was engineered to have these type of struts. One of these missing components can cause a weakness in your overall system. So the first pattern is what I call the sigma pattern, which creates this zigzag pattern. And what's unique about it is there's no horizontal components within the sigma pattern, just diagonal components. Then we have the X pattern, which is a pattern that consists of two crossing struts or braces and the horizontal braces. And then we have the Z pattern and the K pattern. And what's unique for those is that they only have one diagonal component and one horizontal component rather than two. So those are the four patterns that we have within the system. And again, keep in mind that you need to maintain this pattern throughout your entire system to make sure that you have the right engineering and the right components for your struts throughout your entire system. There are four different shapes that struts come in. They can be round tubular, square tubular, flat, or C-channel. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about why struts are so important and from an engineering perspective. As you can see here, this video is demonstrating that a triangle is by nature rigid, whereas rectangular shapes like this square are not rigid. They can pivot and tilt and become distorted with some stresses and some extra forces on them, demonstrating that a merely rectangular shape is not going to be strong. But if we add a single diagonal strut, it will begin to become more rigid. But there's a problem with this as well. It will resist in one direction, but in the other direction, the strut will start to deform. And so you can see here the deformation there. Now, another way to make it even more rigid is to do one of two things: to provide another cross brace, hence some of the systems use X braces, or you could provide a more rigid cross beam, which is more typically used within systems. So when the cross beam is more rigid, it will resist deformation in both directions. And there's different formulas that guide the overall structure that engineers use to determine what kind of struts are necessary. So we show this briefly without explaining all the details, but know that there's a lot of engineering that goes into these systems in order to create the optimal system to carry the weight, to prevent against seismic accidents and things like that. So you can't ignore the overall engineering that goes into this. So that's a brief overview as to why we have these angular pieces, because they make rectangles into rigid shapes that resist deformation and collapse. Now we're going to be considering the ways that your struts could be damaged. Now, the first one is fairly intuitive. It's some sort of a dent that you might have and might see within your struts. And we'll be giving you the inspection qualifications later as to exactly how much would be considered a damaged piece that needs to be replaced. But a dent is one way that they can be damaged. And those dents often happen through forklift impact, because forklifts can damage the rack both by straight on impacts, and oftentimes it's by pivoting too early out of the bay with structures, and the blades or the pallets or the products on the pallets can strike with force onto those struts and cause dents and fractures within the strut system itself. So another form of damage is corrosion or rust. And what you're looking for here is not mere surface rust, but that's a good warning when you see it. It should be addressed. But rust that's penetrating all the way through the structure. That's when you're into compromised struts that need to be replaced. Another thing that you're looking for is missing bolts. So if you're missing a bolt, it's going to compromise the rigidity of this entire strut system, because this is no longer a triangle, because this is not connected. This is merely another rectangle. So look for missing bolts, because those are critical connection points that are very tiny but are very important. The other thing to be looking for is missing struts altogether. So that's why it's important to know what your pattern is. Maybe at some point in time in the past, your system was damaged by either you have used rack or someone damaged it and didn't want you to know, and they removed the strut, and or perhaps in its initial assembly, one piece was missing and was left off. So if you identify a strut pattern and you see that some part is missing, it needs to be addressed and needs to be fixed and repaired. So what happens when we're missing a horizontal or a diagonal? Particularly the diagonals, we have what we call an open frame. Open frames are frames that are missing diagonals, creating that triangular shape that gives rigidity to that particular panel. So if you have any of these, we'll be calling that an open panel, and those need to be avoided at all costs. Okay, so uneven loading is another way that your system can be damaged. So your struts can be damaged just by having loading of your bays and your frames in a way that is not recommended by the engineering and your LARC specifications. So we need to take care of following the specifications, following your software in its loading patterns, so that you don't get uneven loading in your racks, which can cause undue tension on one side of the system and cause those struts to go out of plumb. So that can happen when struts go out of plumb in this direction, and often you'll see them go out of plumb front to back as well. MacRack has an online tool that you can use with any phone. You can bring it up in a browser. You just go to MacRack's website and you go to the inspection menu, and you'll see a tab for the online inspection tool for phones. And you just click on that, you enter your email, and you can enter into our inspection tool. And sure enough, we've got a whole section here that you just hit that's about struts. And it will tell you what the deflection is needed from side to side. So it'll tell you that you're supposed to be looking for missing spacers, rows, bolts, and missing things altogether. It'll tell you to report any small dents or cuts. It'll tell you to look for corrosion. It'll tell you to look for deflection side to side. You need to replace the strut if you see more deflection than a 1/2 inch side to side. The other thing that you need to check is deflection on a diagonal. If the deflection is more than 1/2 inch again, you need to replace that particular strut. This is what the phone checklist looks like, and you can go back and forth within the various elements that you need to check for your struts. And then you can go back to the main menu, and then you can see all the different components that need to be inspected as well. So this tool you can take out into the warehouse yourself, and you can begin to do a primary inspection. Now all of your racking needs to be inspected periodically by a professional from MacRack or one of our partners, so that you can have a professional inspection, which is something that is mandated by RMI and other inspection and regulatory agencies for the warehousing industry. But this tool is a great way for you to be able to get a primary picture, an initial picture about how your system is doing. And specifically, you can be working on struts by just clicking on the button about struts and learn all the inspection points and all of the particulars about the detailed numbers that you need to know in order to inspect these pieces. Now, let's talk a little bit about repair. Now, MacRack, of course, has pallet rack repair kits, and all of our repair kits have struts that are included within the repair system. So if you perhaps have damage on one of the front pieces of your racking and you have some damage to your struts too, a MacRack repair kit will allow you to repair the strut and the damage at the same time. Now, another tool that you can use if only the strut is broken, you can use this product from Damotech. It's called a Damo brace. The Damo brace is a mechanism that you can see replaces the damaged strut with a new component. This component is flexible from 24 inches all the way out to 96 inches and is compatible with all different makes and models of racking systems. Just to mention one other system that you could do is you could replace the entire frame. Now, replacing an entire frame is going to be a very costly scenario because you're going to have to unload the entire rack. You're going to have to place that inventory somewhere within your warehouse. It's being all the time of unloading, putting it somewhere else, disassembling the rack, not only this rack, but the one parallel to it, buying the new rack piece, installing the new rack piece, rebolting it into the floor, reassembling it, and reloading it. That could take days. Or you can simply have a Damo brace or a pallet rack repair kit sent to you, and you could take care of the problem quickly without causing much disruption or financial downtime for your warehouse. All of the parts from MacRack are RMI compliant, so you know that your engineering and your quality is going to be high. So that brings us to the end of this seminar. We hope you learned why struts are so important. You learned how to inspect them, what to look for damage. And if you have any further questions or if you need a professional inspector, reach out to us here at MacRack and we'd be happy to help you.